Good morning. I will wait a few moments for all of us to be fully connected here, then we'll get started. All right, I'll go ahead and start with introductions and we'll get moving this morning. Good morning. It's September 23rd, 2024. I'm Nicole Kinsey, the presiding hearing officer for the Administrative Hearings Office of the State Water Resources Control Board. This is the hearing on the pending petition for assignment of state filed application 25517 and accompanying water rate application 25517X01 and the pending request for release from priority of state filed applications 25513, 25514, the unassigned portion of 25517, 22235, 23780, and 23781 in favor of water right application 25517X01 of Sites Project Authority. The hearing today is being conducted by Zoom. This hearing is also being broadcast live on the AHO YouTube channel. And if you're not planning to speak or participate today, if you would please use the YouTube channel for viewing the hearing rather than logging in to the Zoom platform, that would be appreciated. Both the audio and video of the hearing are being recorded, and we will post files of the recording in the FTP folder for this proceeding. The YouTube recording will also be available on the AHO YouTube webpage. If at any time today you're experiencing technical difficulties trying to communicate with us or accessing the Zoom platform, please send an email to the site's email inbox at sites-wr-application@waterboards.ca.gov or to the AHO email inbox. AHO staff are monitoring those inboxes and will let me know. As we have done, we will take breaks. We will take a lunch break and we will have a hard stop at 5 p.m. Ms. Mullen will again be assisting with slides today and exhibits. So if you are a witness or an attorney and you would like Ms. Mullen to advance the slides or bring up a particular exhibit, please feel free to ask her directly. My intent with appearances is just to carry them over, but I will look to the room to see, is there anyone who is joining us today who has not yet in this proceeding had a chance to introduce themselves? Ms. Johnson.
Hi, yep, Kira Johnson. I'm here for the state water contractors. Jenna Mandel-Rice will be out this week and I will be stepping into her seat.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Johnson.
Good morning.
Ms. Chicazola.
Sorry. Hi, Regina Chicazola. I will only be here helping if there's a time that Cecile Willie, our attorney, cannot. So I will most likely be signing out, but back in at times. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Good morning. Is there anyone else? All right, I think I'll try to summarize where we left off. As I recall, we left off with, I'm going to get the numbers right. Hopefully it's panel 7. It's our plants and terrestrial species and burrowing owls. And we were, I believe we were in the middle of cross-examination. Yes, in the middle of cross-examination. And then we will finish that up, and then the plan is to move to panel 9. It was probably not over the weekend, but as of this morning, I received, and I think it was sent earlier, the list, the ordering of witnesses, and I appreciate that from the protestants, at least the NGO collective, I should say. So I appreciate the list of the order of witnesses. That email has been moved over, I believe, to the FTP site, so all of you probably received it, but you can view it there as well. Mr. Busher, is there something else to add?
Yeah, I wanted to flag there. Mr. Hitchings had asked a question about that schedule. So for Dr. Rosenfield, he's not back from his trip in time to testify on the 23rd, on the last day that's scheduled. And we were hoping that we would have a date the following week that he could do that. And I understand Mr. Hitchings is unavailable. And so our request would be that we pick a date. I guess it would at that point be the week of November 4th. for his testimony, because he's not back in time to testify on October 23rd.
So let me throw something out there. I think I had not wanted to schedule anything on October 29th because we had another AHO proceeding, and that proceeding has now settled and is off calendar. So we could consider October 29th as a possible date as a possible hearing day if that works for Mr. Hitchings and others. I don't know. We'll start with you, Mr. Busher. Would October 29th be a possibility? Do you know? I don't know if you know.
That should be, give me one
Possibly.
second. Let me make sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can also return to this if
Uh,
that would be better.
And hearing officer Kenzie and
Yeah.
Mr. Busher, also if the 30th or 31st would work. I don't know whether that works for the hearing officer's calendar or not, but
It doesn't, alas.
okay.
Yes.
I'm going to need to return to the 29th. There's a
Trick or treat. Yeah.
forum meeting on John Rosenfield's calendar that day, and I don't know whether if he's a participant in that, he will have to be there. If not,
Understood.
we may be able to make that work. So he's a little difficult to track down right now. Let me see what I can do on that front. I think any
Otherwise,
of the days the following week should be fine.
And
November 4th.
November 4th is open. I mean, I'm November 4th is open for the AHO, so that's a possibility. We wouldn't schedule the 5th or 6th. Those are our board meeting days. But then we could look to the 7th. But if we could consider October 29th and then November 4th as a backup possibility.
And that works for you, Mr. Hitchings, the 4th?
Yes, the 29th and the 4th can both work.
All right. I will
Thank
endeavor
you.
to get back to this group as quickly as I can on that, and I really appreciate the accommodation.
Thank you. Anything else, Mr. Busher? Great. Thanks. Mr. King.
So just on the revised schedule, I just want to remind, I'm sure you can work around my involvement, but the October 8th is problematic for me, and October 21st, I won't be available. So just want to note that. The other issue I want to bring up is that, I've submitted 2 set of proposed questions for your consideration for the 2 panels today. And for the travel engagement panel, I attached some of the testimony of Ms. Forsyth regarding Zone 3, and all I could find was a Zoom transcript. So whether or not that's going to be allowed or not, or I just want to bring that to your attention for this afternoon, because I wanted to refresh your memory on some questions that I suggested to you for your consideration. So assuming that you allow those, that she may need to refresh her memory for those. It's regarding Zone 3, her testimony in Zone 3. So I just want to bring that to your attention now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. King. I appreciate that. And we'll work through it as we get there. And then I should have mentioned, I did send out and hopefully all of you saw an amended hearing notice with the additional dates and for us and then the rebuttal schedule as well. Just to bring that to your attention. Mr. Hitchings.
Yes, thank you. You may have been intending to get to this, but I think it would be helpful to maybe get some estimates. I don't think we've heard any for cross as the panels 9, 10, and 8, and I think that's our order moving forward. It'll help us with our next panel after panel 9, which looks like it'll start today.
Yes, we can go around the room and do that. Panels 9, I think we did some of this, but we'll go ahead and refresh our memory. Panels 9, 10, and 8. So I will look to the, maybe Mr. Busher, I'll start with you, and I know there may be others. Do you have an estimate for cross-examination for panels 9, 10, and 8?
So I'll defer for panel 9 to Regina or Cecile. For panel 8, I don't see Mr. Busey on, but I think it's less than 2 hours would be our estimate. And I think our questions for panel 10, which is the land acquisition panel, is that right?
Yes.
Are going to be pretty limited.
Okay.
And I know we have a significant cross-examination for the tribal consultation witnesses, but I don't have a specific estimate for that.
Yeah. Is there another representative on the line who has an estimate for questions on panel 9? Dr. Curdy.
Yeah, we anticipate for panel 9, approximately 45 minutes and up to an hour, in that range.
And are you speaking on behalf of the NGO?
I think that would be separate. Yeah.
That would be separate. That's for inclusive
Okay.
tribe. Yeah.
Understood. Thank you.
Mhm.
Is there a representative from the NGO coordinating parties, as we're calling them?
I assume Miss Willie is watching on YouTube,
I see.
waiting for
No
that
problem.
panel to be ready. But I mean, it's going to be, at least half the day, I would imagine, right? It's not.
Yeah, it's
not
going to
gonna be
take a
fast.
significant amount of time. We'll get to that maybe after the break or after lunch. I will get an estimate because that's fair, Mr. Hitchings.
And I apologize. One more thing.
Sure.
If as we go forward, we could get those same estimates from Mr. Hitchings. That doesn't need to be provided, certainly today or before we complete their witnesses. But
Of course.
we've got some people with impacted schedules, and they would like to know with as much certainty as possible when they're going to testify.
Yes, we will do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I will look to Mr. Reese. I'll look to you for the Delta parties, or Ms. Meserve. I saw you were here too, on panels 9, 10, and 8.
In terms of cross-examination,
Yes, please.
maybe 10 minutes each, if that. We'll see how it goes.
Thank you. And Mr. King, I received your questions for panel. You have 7 and 9.
Correct.
And they weren't.
And then my cross-examination involvement will end with panel 9. I don't, no questions for panel 8 or 10. And I appreciate your consideration and will not participate in cross-examination going forward after panel 9.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for letting me know. Ms. Willie, I see you're here.
Yes, good morning. Casso Willie, staff attorney for Safe California Salmon. Sorry, I was on the YouTube watching.
Thank you for joining us.
I would say at least an hour for us. And I think that's a lower end estimate.
Understood. Thank you. I appreciate it. I would say it seems unlikely to me, Mr. Hitchings, that we'll get past panel 9 today. That would be my, in fact, I'm willing to say you can count on it.
Okay, yeah, that sounds right. So thank you.
If that's helpful, I'll commit to that. All right, with that, is there anything else we should address procedurally before we bring back our witnesses from panel 7? Mr. Fisher.
Just, are you still anticipating opening statements from NGO Collaborative tomorrow, or would that be the 30th?
I would anticipate the 30th. Let's see. I don't think we're going to get through panels. Well, it's possible, 10 and 8. If you would please be prepared, we'll get started with opening statements as soon as we're completed with the authorities case in chief.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Is there anything else? Then let's go ahead and pin our witnesses from panel 7. I think I saw them on the line. And then I might need a refresher about, I didn't go back and look at the Zoom, and my notes are. Where did we leave off?
I believe I was next up, Miss Kenzie.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Schutz. Mr. Schutz, to you. We'll go with that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good morning, Ms. Hale and Ms. Weber. I'm Chris Schutz, the Executive Director of the California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance, or CSPA. CSPA is one of the protestants in this proceeding. I'd like to start with Ms. Weber. Ms. Weber, I believe I heard you say in your summary that changes in the stage height of the Sacramento due to diversions to Sites Reservoir would be less than 1/10 of a foot. Did I hear that correctly?
That was my understanding from the earlier testimony for water modeling. I know that it's small, and then I had heard that number.
Okay. Did you look at the stage differences between different flow levels, such as 10,000, 15,000, or 20,000 CFS at different points between Hamilton City and the Wilkins Slough on the Sacramento River in preparing your testimony?
Not specifically. I relied on the work done by the hydrologists, and the water modeling team.
Okay. Would it surprise you to know that the stage flow difference at Wilkins Slough between 20,000 CFS and 15,000 CFS is approximately 4 feet?
Objection, lacks foundation, assumes facts not in evidence.
That's fair. Sustained. Mr. Schutz, do you have
I could provide a series of graphs that demonstrate that, if that would be helpful.
Yes, I think we need some basis for that question. A foundation.
I'm not sure I can manage it
On the fly.
on the fly. I do have it prepared. Let's just go ahead. And we'll address that in rebuttal. That's fine.
Thank you.
So let me ask it this way. Would a stage change of between 2 and 4 feet between Hamilton City and Wilkins Slough on the Sacramento River, in your opinion, have any effect on the riparian vegetation in that reach of the Sacramento River?
It also would depend on timing as well. I don't believe so. There's obviously change that occurs over the year from season to season, under current conditions, and the vegetation is adapted to those changes.
Are you aware that between Hamilton City and about Princeton on the Sacramento River, there is an extensive riparian forest along the Sacramento River?
Objection, lacks foundation.
Ms. Weber, can you characterize the status of the riparian forest between Hamilton City and Princeton, California, on the Sacramento River?
I do not know the details of that. I'm thinking you might be referring to I think it's Llano Seco area.
Well, there's a number of miles between the two distances. So you did not do any field studies along the Sacramento River, but downstream of Hamilton City in order to prepare your testimony. Is that correct?
That's correct. That was not within our study area.
And isn't part of your testimony going to the fact that there would be no impact on the riparian corridor in the Sacramento River from sites diversions?
Yes, based on the conclusions of the water modeling.
I see, but you didn't do any independent evaluation or field work in order to verify the water modeling, did you?
To verify water modeling? No.
To verify, okay. Ms. Weber, isn't it true that in May and June, seed dispersal for cottonwoods would take place along the Sacramento River?
I believe that's true.
And isn't it true that the stage height of the Sacramento River would affect the dispersal and the inundation of the root zones for cottonwoods along the Sacramento River in May and June?
What, I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please? The first part?
Isn't it true that the stage height would affect the seed dispersal? The stage height and the root zone inundation would affect the dispersal and recruitment of cottonwoods along the Sacramento River?
It could, yes.
And isn't it true in general that the descending limb of the snowmelt hydrograph is particularly important for the recruitment of cottonwoods?
I'm not familiar with, could you repeat that, please?
Yes, isn't it true that the descending limb of the snowmelt hydrograph is particularly important for recruitment of cottonwoods?
Objection vague as to time, place, year type.
I think it's a general question. The snowmelt hydrograph can vary from year to year. I'm asking specifically about the Sacramento River, if that would help. But I'm asking a general question about cottonwood recruitment based on her testimony as an expert in vegetation.
And overruled, I'll allow it.
Now, would you please repeat? The snowmelt hydrograph is important?
Isn't it true that the descending limb of the snowmelt hydrograph is particularly important for the recruitment of cottonwoods?
I don't believe I have sufficient expertise in that particular area to confirm that.
Based on your knowledge of the sites project, isn't there a potential that diversions to sites reservoir could shorten the duration or extent of the descending limb of the snowmelt hydrograph in the Sacramento River between Hamilton City and Wilkins Slough?
I can't confirm that for sure. What I did consider was that there is still going to be protection for fish through the Bend River pulse protection. and that allowing those pulses of high water would also benefit riparian.
But the pulse protection would not apply, as proposed, would not apply in June, isn't that correct?
True, but in June, I don't believe the riparian vegetation is not going to be as sensitive by June. That's fairly late in the year.
Okay. I have a few questions for Ms. Hale. Good morning, Ms. Hale.
Good morning.
Did you look at wildlife species other than what you termed sensitive species in preparing your testimony?
So common species?
If that's the term you use.
Yeah, if we don't consider them, I guess, sensitive, then we consider them generally common species. Not specifically. A little bit in the context of wildlife corridors.
Okay, so did you look at deer in the context of wildlife corridors?
Just very broadly, yes.
And what findings did you make, and where can we find them regarding impacts of this large reservoir to deer migration corridors?
I didn't address specific deer migration corridors. I looked more generally at the information that CDFW provides in their corridor information that they have online. And that's discussed in that section of the EIR, EIS where wildlife corridors is discussed. Towards the end of my chapter, I don't know the specific pages.
Okay. What species did you look at more specifically in terms of wildlife migration corridors?
It was more of just a general analysis of wildlife corridors. There's a more part of the mitigation is to look at species that represent different guilds, to look at specific effects that could occur on small species, medium, and larger species. So that's part of the mitigation is to do more detailed analysis of effects on both common and sensitive species.
And how would you propose taking the analysis you do in the future to mitigate impacts you discover when you've already, assuming that you've already decided that the project is going forward?
Well, the mitigation is set up to use the data from the studies to determine where crossings would be appropriate, how far apart they should be based on the size group of species that we're talking about. And then there's requirements for monitoring those to make sure that they're functioning properly and to keep them open and passable. So it's all detailed in the mitigation measure.
So are you speaking of crossings of roads and related non-inundated facilities, or are you talking about crossings of the reservoir?
Crossings for roads. The conclusion for the reservoir was that it was significant and unavoidable. There's not much that can be done for the reservoir itself due to its size.
So again, I ask you what mitigation measures would affect would improve the condition for species such as deer, whose migration patterns were interrupted by the construction of a large reservoir?
Yeah, I mean, once the reservoir is in place, there really isn't much that can be done. I think for deer in particular, it's a larger animal. It's going to find some benefit with the reservoir. But it would affect its ability to especially travel east-west. It's going to have a long way to go around.
So similarly, the burrowing owl is one of the species you looked at in your analysis, is it not?
Yes.
And isn't it true that the burrowing owl, the western burrowing owl, has been accepted as a candidate for listing as threatened under the California Endangered Species Act?
I believe it has, yes.
And to your knowledge, are western burrowing owls present in the footprint of the reservoir?
There's suitable habitat for them. I don't recall offhand if there are records for occurrences. I believe that there could be. But there's definitely potential for it to be there.
So similar to the question I asked about deer, how would you propose to mitigate for the loss of nesting habitat for burrowing owls due to inundation of the current habitat by Sites Reservoir?
Well, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife has mitigation guidelines that the authority would follow for mitigating for impacts on burrowing owl habitat and breeding sites.
And can you tell us what some of those mitigation measures would be? Give us some examples.
Yes, so conducting surveys to determine if they're using the site for breeding or overwintering, establishing exclusion areas around burrows that are occupied, delaying activities to outside of the breeding season to avoid impacts. Then there's compensatory mitigation for loss of habitat.
So of those first three categories, none of those would be effective, particularly if the area, the existing habitat were inundated. Is that correct?
Yes, those are measures to avoid, direct effects during like construction.
Okay, so during construction, but once the reservoir was constructed, the habitat would disappear. Is that correct?
Correct.
And in terms of the compensatory mitigation, how do you compensate for? I mean, how do you compensate for loss of habitat?
Generally, it's preservation of suitable or occupied habitat in a nearby area.
But presumably, if there is habitat that's being utilized in a nearby area already, your mitigation consists of maintaining something that's already there. It doesn't replace the lost habitat. Is that correct?
Correct. It's, once the reservoir is inundated, that grassland is no longer there.
I believe you said last week, and I don't remember at which point, either in cross-examination or in your summary, that you did not favor transporting or moving burrowing owls. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And can you explain why that is, please?
It just personally, I think it's kind of cruel to evict owls from their burrows. But CDFW allows it. So it is a method to avoid take and to get them out of an area that's going to be disrupted or destroyed. So it is a measure that can be implemented if there's no other, option.
In your experience, is that type of measure generally effective?
It's sometimes effective and sometimes not effective. Yes.
Could we pull up sites 264, the final slide, please? This is your summary of your testimony.
Mhm.
I call your attention to the term largely not result in
Mhm.
unreasonable adverse impacts. What did you mean by largely?
I was mostly referring to the um, the impacts excluding wildlife movement due to the presence of the reservoir.
So let me ask this a different way. When you say it will largely not result in unreasonably adverse impacts, does that mean that sometimes it would result in unreasonably adverse impacts, in your opinion?
It was more that the impact from the reservoir on wildlife movement, while likely would affect movement, there is some question to it. So it was using largely was a term to sort of indicate that, we aren't 100% sure.
All right, thank you. Ms. Mullen, you could take that down. So which species were you looking at specifically, other than those that we've mentioned, in terms of impacts on wildlife migration, excuse me?
I mean, wildlife migration came up in many of the sensitive species that I discussed, from Western spadefoot and trying to remember which specific sensitive species I discussed that topic on. The amphibians, and then like badger, and then I had, the general discussion that sort of encompassed the common species and referred back to the species where I had that specific discussion.
Did you specifically consider mountain lions?
I believe they were just mentioned in that discussion, but not like a detailed analysis.
Okay, and you didn't consider the impact of the potential changes in interaction between deer herds and mountain lions?
No.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Ms. Weber. That's all I have, Ms. Kenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Schutz. With that, I'll turn. Are there others from the NGO coordinating parties who have questions for this panel?
Yeah, Hearing Officer Kenzie, this is Eric Busher. I have, I don't know, maybe 3 questions.
Great. Go ahead, Mr. Busher.
And Good morning, Ms. Weber and Ms. Hale. My name is Eric Busher. I'm an attorney at San Francisco Baykeeper, one of the protesting parties in this action. Ms. Weber, I just wanted to follow up really quickly on the testimony you gave to Mr. Schutz. You described he asked you if you visited in the field a certain area of the Sacramento River, and I think you said that you didn't because that was outside the study area. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, in the EIS, our study area was defined as the project footprint, all the construction areas plus a 300-foot buffer. So that in those areas, that's where we did all the land cover mapping and assessment for special status species. For the operations impacts, that's where these other areas come in. And there was not specific mapping done in those areas.
Thank you. And who determined that study area?
I'm not sure.
Which study area are you referring to? Because we had the project specific one, which Lisa and I actually discussed what the buffer distance should be for the 300-foot area. And then the operations area, I think, was just based on, I would say, more of the hydrological analysis for how far downstream effects might occur.
So let me, and I appreciate that clarification. So let me ask this way. In terms of the ground cover mapping that was done within the project footprint plus the buffer and not done in the region that Mr. Schutz was asking you about, who made that determination as to whether what the study area was with respect to that delineation?
I don't know.
And Ms. Hale, do you have anything to add there?
No, I think just because we weren't expecting any land cover changes in the operations area, that we didn't map land cover there. Would you agree, Lisa?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And
oh, sorry, go ahead.
That area, I'm also trying to think of how to incorporate the water modeling, which would give information as to areas that might or might not be affected. And this was all happening concurrently. So, we didn't really have that at the time. I think, we're working under the assumption that that was not going to be necessary. If the water modeling conclusions had been different, i.e. that there would be substantial changes in flow and elevation, downstream of the project diversions, that would have required some rethinking of what was necessary. But because the conclusions were that changes would be minimal, then we stayed with the specific study area that we started with.
Okay. And then I think the last question, the two of you both say we in response to those, right? We decided that this was appropriate. Is we the two of you, or is we, right, you and Sites Authority?
In terms of the buffer size, or
just what we've been talking about, right? Just that delineation.
I think that was more internal among biologists.
Okay. And Ms. Hale, do you have anything to add to that?
Sorry, there's a blower next door that's really loud. It's distracting. Lisa and I definitely coordinated on the buffer for the construction study area, and I would agree with her that we were relying on the hydrological analysis to sort of inform the study area for the operations portion.
All right, thank you both. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Busher. Are there others from the coordinating NGO parties? With that, I will then look to the Delta water users. Mr. Rees or Ms. Meserve, do you have questions for this panel?
No, thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. King, I received your questions, so let's work through those. I see
Thank
you're
you
here.
very much. Yep.
That's great. I'll go ahead. I'm going to hand it over to you, Mr. King. You can go. I think some of these may have been answered, but
Yes,
let you go
thank
ahead and
you.
get started.
Yes, so Ms. Weber, thank you for your time. So and some of this may be follow on to the conversation you had regarding the hydrology model. But on paragraph, so I refer to a paragraph on your testimony, page 11, paragraph 16. Perhaps Ms. Mullen can bring that up, the last sentence.
Let's see. What is we have the
It's
exhibit.
sites 113C.
Great, thank you.
It's page 11, last sentence of paragraph 16. So Miss Weber, that last sentence, let me just change my here we go. It does it say that you do not believe that the operation of the project would affect the hydrology of the Colusa Basin drain, nor the riparian and seasonal wetlands associated with it? Is that what that says?
That's a summary of what's in. I think that is the final EIR, maybe response to comments that is being referred to there.
Okay.
And that conclusion is based again on the hydrologist's conclusions, which
Well,
are
thank
in
you.
the EIR and in the responses to comments.
Thank you. It may be that you then have some of you're not familiar with this, but are you familiar with the Colusa Mitigation Bank?
Not specifically, no.
Okay. Well, could we bring up King 18, page 1 then, Ms. Mullen? So Ms. Weber, you're not familiar with the establishment of the Colusa Basin Mitigation Bank by operated by Westerfeld?
Not specifically. They have a lot of banks and, I have general awareness of their banks, but I have not focused on this one specifically.
And so then you would not be familiar that it's actually located right below the Colusa National Wildlife Refuge on the Colusa Basin Drain.
Okay.
You're not familiar with that. That's
I'm not
correct.
familiar with that.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, are you familiar? So this may be things that you're not familiar with, but I'd just like to kind of get the affirmative of that. Are you familiar with a portion of the Colusa Basin Drain between Davis Weir Dam and Balsam Dam?
Only generally. I'm not sure if that was part of the field trip that we had earlier last spring.
It's just the area right below the Colusa National Refuge. It's about 6 miles straight.
Okay. No, I'm not.
Okay. So then, are you familiar with Balsam Dam? Have you seen Balsam Dam? Balsam Weir?
I don't believe so. Again,
So-
it might have been part of the field trip that we did. But I
Okay.
don't know if we went far enough south.
Right. Okay. So then you're not familiar with the historical confluence of Upper Sycamore Slough, Dry Slough, and the Coosa Trough, just northeast of College City on the Coosa Basin Channel. Is that correct? You're not familiar with that?
Only in terms of what earlier testimony has discussed when the water modeling team and hydrologists gave their testimony and were cross-examined.
So then you're also not familiar with the oak trees and the other trees on the Coosa Basin Drain, the Upper Sycamore Slough, and the historical Dry Slough at this part of the Coosa Basin Drain Channel. Is that correct? You're not familiar with the oak trees?
The oak trees, no.
Okay. When you mentioned in your testimony, you mentioned the hydrology of the Coosa Basin Drain. That is correct. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And do you mean to include water available for groundwater recharge?
I'm not sure. That conclusion was, as I mentioned, based on conclusions of the hydrologists in the chapters on surface water and what was the other one? In chapters 5 and 7 of the EIR-EIS, where those topics came up.
Okay, great. Ms. Mullen, can we go back to sites 113C, Ms. Weber's testimony, page 13, paragraph 19. So Ms. Weber, this is regarding the operational impacts on special status plants. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the last sentence, does that say that project operation would result in less than significant impacts and not in unreasonable adverse impacts on special status plants? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Mullen, can you bring up AHO 7? I think it's actually Site 76. It's the EIR. Is that Site 76 or AHO 76? I think it's Site 76. I'm sorry. No, it's AHO 76, I guess. No. It's the chapter 9 of the EIR, EIS. Is that AHO 76, Ms. Weber?
Probably AHO.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's an AHO.
I thought, sorry about that. So, and then go down to page 955. Yes, okay. So Miss Weber, in this paragraph here, seek whether significant termination and mitigation measures. Do you refer to the Oak Woodlands Conservation Act? Is that correct?
Yes, I'm looking for it. Yes.
Okay. And also, I think if we go down, can we just scroll down a little bit? I'm trying to find it. Do you also remember, I believe it's in this section generally, but do you remember referring to the Coosa County General Plan and its reference to preservation of oaks in the Coosa County General Plan?
Yes.
Okay. Can you, in your knowledge of the Oak Woodlands Conservation Act, would oak trees on the Coosa Basin Drain and Upper Sycamore Slough be protected by this act?
They could be. Yeah.
Can you just elaborate what the scope of a protection is with this act, and perhaps how the Coosa County General Plan might impact the protection of oaklands in Coosa County?
Mr.
Objection to the extent it calls for a legal conclusion.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Let's ask the biology questions here, please.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Great. And that's so just to confirm, oaks on the Coosa Basin Drain and on Upper Sycamore Slough, that may be impacted by the operation of the Sites Reservoir project would be come under the protection of, or would be subject to the scope of the Oak Woodlands Conservation Act. Is that correct?
Same objection.
Okay.
Make sure it's not a legal question.
Okay. So oak trees on the Coosa Basin Drain and Upper Sycamore Slough are the type of oak trees that are within the scope of the Oak Woodlands Conservation Act.
Same objection.
Okay.
I think you've made your point, Mr. King.
Okay, all right, let's move on. Thank you very much, Ms. Weber. I'd like to have some questions for Ms. Hale now. So if we can bring up Sites 144, her testimony. And if we could refer to...
It's 114.
Oh, I'm sorry, 114. Sorry, thank you for your correction. Page 3. Paragraph 4. Line 16. It's a Miss Hale. The sentence, does the sentence, let's see, I'm reading from lines 16. Please let me know if this is correct. The other sources of data that were reviewed were the CNDDB search results for occurrences of special status wildlife species, where you refer to AHO 17, up to 5 miles outside the study area to conservatively ensure that any special status wildlife is known to occur in the vicinity of the project area was identified. And it could continue on. Is that a correct reading, Ms. Hale?
Yes.
Okay. Can you talk about why you chose 5 miles?
Well, 5 miles is a pretty considerable distance to include any species that we felt like had a potential to occur in the project area. It encompasses most of the habitat types that would be present in the study area.
Right. And would you, within that consideration, would you consider flows and sediment flows from Stone Corral and Funk's Creek as being important in that consideration of the 5 mile area?
I don't think flows really came into that judgment. It's more about habitat types that would be encompassed within that 5 mile distance.
Right. Can we bring up, Ms. Miller, can we bring up AHO 77, page 16, I think? Let me find my... Yeah, no. Just page 16. Can you go down? I'm looking for, so yeah. So in this, in page 16, you start talking about conservancy ferry shrimp. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then can you go down, go to the next page, Ms. Mullen? And you talk about vernal pool ferry shrimp. Is that correct, Ms. Hale?
Yes.
And then one more page. And then also vernal pool tadpole shrimp. Are these 3 shrimp species special status species?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Can we go back to page 17, Ms. Mullen? Okay, and go down to discussion of vernal pool ferry strip. Let's see, I guess the next page where the location has been found. Yeah, so in Ms. Hell, DC says occurrence in and near the study area. It says, tell me if I'm reading this correct. There are several records of vernal pool fairy shrimp occurrences at the Sacramento National Wildlife Refuge, approximately 2.75 to 3.7 miles from the study area. Is that correct?
Yes, that was data that's in California Department of Fish and Wildlife's database.
When you mean the Sacramento National Wildlife Refuge, do you mean the Sacramento National Wildlife Refuge complex, which includes Delavan Refuge?
I'm not sure. I would have to go back and look at those records more closely. It's been a few years.
So is it possible that that it actually refers to Delavan National Refuge, which is within 5 miles of the study area? Is that possible?
It's possible.
Okay. Can we go down to vernal pool tadpole shrimp and look for the same paragraph regarding occurrence? Go next page, please. And then Ms. Hale, it says occurrence in and near the study area. There's a sentence that reads, there are several known occurrences of vernal pool tadpole shrimp at the Sacramento National Wildlife Refuge, 1.25 to 3 miles. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so that's at a National Wildlife Refuge, but you're not sure if it's Delavan or maybe potentially another part of the complex.
No, I would have to relook at those data locations.
Okay, great. Can we go back up, Ms. Mullen? We need to find the reference for the vernal pool shrimp. Okay. Vernal.
Mr. King, if it's the same question, I think I understand the.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Can we go back to sites 114, Miss Hell's testimony, page 12. Paragraph 24. And can we scroll down the bottom line 27? Ms. Hill, do you see on the last sentences, minor increases erosion during the change in sediment deposition from increased flows from bypass releases in funks? Can we go to the next page, top of next page, Ms. Mullen? In funks and Stonecrawl Creek?
Yes.
And so that's what I was referring to when I talked about flows. Can you elaborate on what you meant to cover in those parts of that reply in your testimony?
Are you asking in reference to the vernal pool species or just?
No, it's regarding the flows, minor changes in the geomorphic regime and flows from funks and Stonecrawl creeks.
Yeah, so that conclusion was based on the analysis that was done by the hydrology team. So my conclusion was based on their conclusion that that those effects would be minor.
Okay. Would these species be affected by water flows with high TDS or high salt levels? The shrimp species we talked about.
Well, generally habitat for shrimp species is inundated by rainfall and not by creek flow.
Okay. So then methyl mercury would be the same. Impact of methyl mercury caused by sediment flows or drainage regimes would not be impacted. Would that be your conclusion also?
Objection, vague, compound.
I think that's fair. And Mr. King, I don't see this in your list of this line of questioning. I don't think, is not in
Yeah,
your.
no, I said, would these species be negatively impacted by water flows with high TDS? How about the generation of methyl mercury?
Which species? The shrimp species?
Yes. It's in the question regime number 2. C, 2C.
Do I have my 2C is about garter snakes.
No, I sent you a new list of questions.
I see.
On substitution.
All right. Well, go ahead, Mr. King, and
Okay. I have one more. I'm almost done this, and I have one more question after this. One more set of questions. So, Ms. Hell, do you know if Dr. Hasrick, who prepared the aquatic study, was aware of these presence of these species within 5 miles?
I couldn't say if he was. But again, I would say that the vernal pool species typically don't occur in wetlands that are inundated by creek flow. They typically are in isolated wetlands that are filled by rainfall.
Thank you. Okay, so last set of questions. If you could bring up Miss Hale's presentation, sites 277, page 9. Page 9. Yeah. Her presentation, which is sites 277.
Just point of clarification, I think Ms. Hales is 264, Ms. Weber's is 277.
Thank you. Do you mean Ms. Weber's, Mr. King?
Yes, I guess. Let me think. Operation will not change flow. Yes. So then I guess I should talk to Miss Weber about this. My apologies. So Miss Weber.
Is there a question?
Yes, there's a question. Ms. Weber, does that bullet point, the second to last, says operation will not change flows or riparian habitats, inclusive basin drain?
Yes.
Okay, and you may already have based off what you may have the same answer, but do you understand that flows from Stone Corral and Funk's Creek are to be impounded within the reservoir?
Yes.
Okay. Do you understand that the proposed Dunnigan pipeline is expected to cause water to back up as far as the Balsam Dam near College City?
I don't know that detail.
Do you understand that this distance is approximately 13 miles?
Distance from where to where?
From the Dunnigan pipeline can interconnect with Inclusive Basin Drain and Balsam Dam?
Oh, no, I did not know that.
Okay. Do you understand this portion of Inclusive Basin Drain between the Davis Weir Dam and Balsam Dam is not within the scope of operations plan for the project?
Objection, lacks foundation.
Okay. Then the last.
Are you just, when you say operations plan, what do you mean, Mr. King? You don't mean the study plan for the biological resources?
No, the operations plan that was filed by authority. Mr. Robinette confirmed that it wasn't at the site visit, but so I have one last question. And I think she might have answered, but just for the record, what is the basis of your professional opinion that the operation will quote unquote not change flows and quote unquote not change riparian habitat on the Colusa Basin Drain?
What was the basis of that conclusion? I'm
Your
sorry.
what is the basis for your professional opinion that the operation will quote non unquote quote not change flows unquote and quote not change riparian habitats quote end quote on the Colusa Basin Drain?
That was based on the conclusions of the hydrology assessment in the EIR EIS, which said that there are a number of inputs to the Colusa Basin Drain from several creeks as well as agricultural runoff, and that changes in flows from Stone Corral Creek and Funks Creek wouldn't substantially change flows in the Colusa Basin Drain.
Well, so thank you very much, Ms. Weber. Thank you, Ms. Hell. Thank you for the corrections.
Thank you, Mr. King.
Yeah.
With that, I don't see Mr. Ornbaum on the line. I realize we have several additional parties, so I'm going to look generally to the room. Is there any other party who has questions for this panel at this time? All right, with that, then I will look to you, Mr. Hitchings. Do you have redirect for these witnesses?
Here, Mr. Kinsey, it would be helpful if we could just take a short break, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, just to confirm that. And maybe this is almost a break time anyway, so
Yes.
I think that'd be helpful, and we may be able to, well, we will know the answer after that.
Great. No, it's a convenient time for a break. Let's take 10 minutes and we'll come back at 10:23.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I thought you had a good answer for that, Lisa.
All right, I'll look to Ms. Cott. Are you ready for us to go back on the record?
I am, thank you.
Thank you, and welcome back. Mr. Hitchings, do you have redirect for your witnesses?
Actually, we do not, so no redirect for this panel 7.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Ms. Weber, and thank you, Ms. Hale. I really appreciate your testimony in this proceeding, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, I will look to Mr. Hitchings and Mr. Ferguson. Are you ready to bring up your witnesses for panel 9?
Yeah, we are ready.
Great.
So I see Alicia Forsyth, and our other witness is Danielle Reese. And yes, she's on. So we could bring her up, that'd be great too. Oh, great.
There we go. And I'll look to my team. Will you please, and maybe you already did this and I'm in the wrong view here. There we go. You already did it. I will go ahead and I will administer the oath and then we'll get started. I know Ms. Forsyth, you did this, have gone through this, but we'll go through it again today. Will you please both come off mute and raise your right hand? Ms. Forsyth and Ms. Reese, do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
I do.
Thank you very much. Please go ahead and introduce your witnesses, Mr. Ferguson.
Thank you. Panel 9 will address evidence relevant to hearing issue 3D1, which concerns whether the proposed appropriation would impact tribal lands, tribal interests, or tribal cultural resources. You will hear from Ms. Forsyth regarding the authority's AB 52 consultation and other tribal outreach, which are a component of the authority's efforts to identify potentially affected tribal lands, tribal interests, and tribal cultural resources. You will then hear from Ms. Danielle Reese regarding the authority's efforts and plans to identify, avoid, protect, and treat tribal cultural resources, tribal lands, and tribal interests, and efforts to address racial equity, environmental justice with respect to Native American tribes. So we will start with Ms. Forsyth. Oh, sorry, I thought I heard some background. Oh, we lost Ms. Reese. Okay,
I
great.
think she's here, but she's just no longer pinned because we're starting with Ms. Forsyth. My team was on it.
Ms. Forsyth, will you please state your name for the record?
Alicia Forsyth.
And is Exhibit Site 71 an accurate statement of your written testimony?
It is.
And I believe you previously testified that you prepared that testimony, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And Sites 262 is an accurate statement of your presentation of your written testimony, correct?
That is correct.
And you prepared that summary presentation?
I did.
So with respect to the portion of your testimony concerning tribal consultation, do you have any corrections that you would like to make at this time?
I would, yes. On the sentence in my testimony on page 22, starting with line 15, that starts with the authority contacted thee, I would like to delete the words, quote, the authority contacted thee, end quote. After the word tribes on line 16, I would like to add the phrase, quote, are traditionally and culturally affiliated with these areas, end quote. At the end of this sentence on line 21, I'd like to add a new sentence as follows, quote, the authority contacted the 7 tribes that had not been previously contacted, period, end quote. In my summary presentation, sites 262, slide 34, I would like to strike the number 13 on the first line. These 2 changes are intended to reflect the fact that we only contacted 7 tribes in that outreach effort described there. I also found an incorrect reference to an exhibit in my testimony. The reference to exhibit sites number 099 on page 29, line 24 of my testimony should be replaced with sites 073 instead. That is all.
Thank you. So just sites exhibits 95 through 101 and and sites 73, which were submitted with your written testimony and cited therein, include true and correct copies of documentation concerning the authority's tribal consultation efforts?
They do.
All right, at this time, would you please summarize your written testimony relevant to the topics you are covering on this witness panel?
I will, thank you. Ms. Mullen, if you could bring up sites 262 and move to slide 29, please. Excellent. As Mr. Ferguson indicated on this panel, I am summarizing my testimony relative to the authority's efforts to conduct consultation and outreach activities with California Native American tribes. As part of my role as the authority's environmental planning and permitting manager, I oversee and have been personally involved in the authority's tribal consultation and outreach efforts. Next slide, Ms. Mullen. Thank you. Assembly Bill 52, commonly referred to as AB 52, established a detailed stepwise process for a California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, lead agency to consult with Native American tribes that are traditionally and culturally affiliated with the geographic area of a proposed project. As the lead agency under CEQA, the Sites Authority engaged in formal consultation with tribes under AB 52. The authority also engaged in voluntary and informal basis with tribes that did not request formal consultation. The consultation and outreach efforts over the last several years were a key component of the authority's efforts to identify potentially affected tribal lands, tribal interests, and tribal cultural resources, as well as to examine the nature of and potential opportunities to mitigate such impacts. My testimony outlines the numerous meetings and consultation activities undertaken from 2017 to present. The exhibits attached to my testimony provide documentation of these efforts. With regard to AB 52, each project under CEQA is a separate and distinct consultation effort. It is important to note that my testimony and this summary describe consultation and outreach efforts generally in chronological order for the ease of the reader and understanding the timeline. These consultation and outreach efforts include efforts relative to the overall sites project, along with separate and distinct consultation and outreach activities relative to geotechnical activities conducted by the authority. All of these activities are described as they all have been undertaken by the authority, include the same general geographic area, include the same or similar Native American tribes. It is also important to note that my testimony and this summary describe both consultation and outreach efforts generally together. However, certain procedural requirements and timelines are outlined in AB 52 that are necessary for both a lead agency and a tribe to embark on to be in AB 52 consultation. Next slide. AB 52 consultation efforts for the project began in 2017. In January 2017, the authority contacted the California Native American Heritage Commission to request a list of tribes that have traditional or cultural affiliation with the geographic area of the project. In February 2017, the Native American Heritage Commission responded, providing the authority with 7 tribes with traditional lands or cultural places located within the project area. That same month, the authority sent project notification letters to all 7 tribes identified by the Native American Heritage Commission. 2 tribes responded to this AB 52 notification letter: the Cachildehi Band of Wintu Indians, or the Cachildehi, and the Yochadehi Wintu Nation, or Yochadehi. Meetings were held with both tribes. The authority received no other communications from other tribes in response to its 2017 notification letter. Next slide. In February 2019, the authority began planning geotechnical investigation work in the project area and provided notice to Yochadehi, Kachildehi, and Quetzaldehi. This AB 52 notification was limited to these three tribes because the geotechnical work was restricted to lands directly associated with these tribes' ancestral territories. Yochadehi and Kachildehi responded and requested consultation. Quetzaldehi did not respond. In the subsequent meetings with Yochadehi, the tribe provided its treatment protocol for handling human remains and cultural items in the event that any were found during the geotechnical activities. The authority incorporated these protocols into the geotechnical efforts and actually continues to use them to date. The authority and Kachildehi entered into a contract under which Kachildehi would provide tribal monitors for the geotechnical work. The tribe subsequently provided monitors for all geotechnical work conducted during the 2019 and 2020 timeframe under a reimbursable contract with the authority. Next slide. In late 2019, the authority began a value planning process, both to improve the affordability of the project while also reducing the environmental impacts and addressing comments received on the project. In the summer and fall of 2022, the authority contacted Yochadehi and Kachildehi, the two tribes that the authority was in AB 52 consultation with for the project. This outreach was intended to provide information related to refinements to the project. The authority held a number of calls, meetings, and shared GIS information with the tribes during this time. Ultimately, the authority decided to recirculate the 2017 draft EIR, and in November 2020, the authority mailed AB 52 notification letters to all 7 tribes identified by the Native American Heritage Commission as having traditional or cultural affiliation with the geographic area of the project. The notification identified the authority's decision to recirculate the 2017 draft EIR to address modifications to the project and included a revised project description. In response to this notification, Yochadehi requested a site visit, which occurred in January 2021. None of the other tribes responded to the authority's November 2020 letter. Next slide. In 2021, the authority reached out to tribes traditionally or culturally affiliated with locations where the project operations have the potential to change river flows as compared to current conditions. These areas include stretches of the Sacramento River from Keswick and Shasta County down through the Yolo Bypass in Yolo County, the Feather River from Oroville Dam to the confluence with the Sacramento River, and the American River from Folsom Dam to the confluence with the Sacramento River. There are 13 tribes traditionally or culturally affiliated with these areas, 6 of which have been previously contacted by the authority. The authority reached out to the remaining 7 tribes not previously contacted. The United Auburn Indian Community of the Auburn Rancheria was the only tribe to respond to this notification. In their response, United Auburn deferred to tribes more local to the project, but requested receipt of project updates and an opportunity to review the cultural resources report. Next slide. In November 2021, the authority issued a notice of availability announcing the public review and comment period for the revised draft EIR and dates of virtual public meetings. The United Auburn commented on the revised draft EIR, identifying that the document erroneously stated that the United Auburn had not responded to the June 2021 outreach letter I mentioned on the last slide. This error was corrected in the final EIR. Yochadehi commented on the revised draft EIR in February 2022. Yochadehi noted that the revised draft EIR lacks significant information on tribal cultural resources and that the Yochadehi was analyzing data in order to provide meaningful comments. The authority previously provided Yochadehi with the confidential cultural resources report and subsequently provided Yochadehi with GIS locational data for all of the sites identified in that confidential report. The authority requested Yochadehi's comments on the revised draft EIR in 4 separate meetings, allowing late comments until at least March 2023, over a year after the comment period had closed. Yochadehi ultimately provided comments in November of 2023 on the revised draft EIR. The authority responded to those comments and provided both Yochadehi's comments and the authority's response to those comments in an email to our board of directors on November 16th, 2023. Kachildehi did not provide comments on the revised draft EIR in the comment period and throughout 2022. As I will describe on a subsequent slide, the authority and Kachildehi had a number of discussions and exchanged a number of letters in 2023 as part of the AB 52 consultation efforts. Kachildehi ultimately provided a letter on October 2023, which the tribe requested to be included in the final EIR. Unfortunately, at that time, the final EIR had undergone final review and was in production for release. Changes to the document were not possible. The authority responded to Kachildehi's comments and provided both Kachildehi's comments and the authority's response to the comments in our board packet for our board's November 17th, 2023 meeting. This is the meeting where the final EIR was certified by the board. Next slide. Backing up a little bit in time here, the authority also conducted 2 additional geotechnical efforts related to the project. The first is the 2022 to 2024 geotechnical investigations. For this effort, in February of 2022, the authority sent AB 52 notifications to all 7 tribes identified by the Native American Heritage Commission. Kachildehi responded and deferred consultation and communication to Yochadehi. Yochadehi responded requesting consultation, which the authority and Yochadehi conducted, and Yochadehi also requested to conduct tribal monitoring efforts. The authority and Yochadehi entered into a contract under which Yochadehi would provide tribal monitors for the geotechnical work, and the tribe has provided those monitors for these field efforts under a reimbursable contract with the authority. No other tribes have responded to this notification. The second effort is the 2023 to 2024 test pits and geotechnical investigations. For this effort, in August of 2022, the authority sent AB 52 notification letters again to all 7 tribes identified by the Native American Heritage Commission. Yochadehi responded and requested consultation, which the authority and Yochadehi conducted. No other tribes responded to the authority's notification letter. Yochadehi has also provided tribal monitors for these field efforts, again under a reimbursable contract with the authority. Kachildehi later expressed interest in both geotechnical field activities, and the authority worked to amend its contract with Kachildehi such that the tribe also provided tribal monitors for some of these field activities under a reimbursable contract with the authority. I wanted to note that even prior to Kachildehi's interest in these activities, and notwithstanding the fact that the authority was not an AB 52 consultation for the geotechnical activities with Kachildehi, the authority did send geotechnical plans and reports to both Kachildehi and Yochadehi as part of this effort. Next slide. As previously testified by Mr. Brown, in mid-2022, the authority was interested in creating forums for additional input from the local community, including the tribal community, into the project. As part of this, the authority sought to establish the local community working group and the tribal government working group. The purpose of the tribal government working group was to create a forum for efficient, effective, and meaningful input from tribal nations into the project. We were also interested in figuring out ways to connect with and engage tribes that had historically not participated in the project, such as the Quetzalteji and the Grindstone Rancheria. Invitations were sent to tribes in January 2023, and initial responses from Quetzalteji and Yochideji were favorable. Paskenta declined participation, but wanted to continue the ongoing one-on-one discussions between the tribe and the authority, which the authority has continued. Ultimately, for a variety of reasons, the Tribal Government Working Group has not yet held its first meeting. Next slide. I'd like to focus just a bit on the authority's consultation efforts with both Quetzalteji and Yochideji. On this slide, I'll focus on Quetzalteji, and the next will focus more specifically on Yochideji. The authority and Quetzalteji have engaged in AB 52 consultation efforts since 2017. Quetzalteji engaged in the authority's 2019 geotechnical field efforts and provided tribal monitoring for those efforts. The authority sent information and reports to Quetzalteji on more than 6 occasions from 2020 to 2022 to solicit feedback on the project, including the tribe's knowledge and concerns related to tribal cultural resources and the mitigation measures proposed as part of the project. In general, the tribe would acknowledge receipt of the materials, but no comments were received, and Quetzalteji agreed to meet with the authority only once during that period. In response to materials that the authority sent to Quetzalteji in early 2023, the authority was introduced to the tribe's new cultural preservation officer. The authority requested a meeting with the new cultural preservation officer, and the tribe and the authority subsequently met 4 times in 2023 and exchanged a number of letters. The authority continued to provide reports and data to the tribe throughout 2023, primarily on geotechnical activities, and although the tribe would generally acknowledge receipt of the materials, no comments were provided by the tribe outside of the letter exchange I mentioned previously. Next slide. The authority and Yochideji have also engaged in AB 52 consultation efforts since 2017. Consultation efforts between Yochideji and the authority increased substantially in the 2019 timeframe on both the project and the geotechnical activities. Quarterly meetings were held in 2022, which transitioned to standing monthly meetings in mid-2021. Excuse me, I said that wrong. Quarterly meetings were held in 2020, which transitioned to standing monthly meetings in mid-2021, running through calendar year 2022. Yochideji was actively involved in the 2022 and beyond geotechnical efforts and has provided tribal monitoring for these efforts. Consultation efforts with Yochideji slowed in 2023, with Yochideji ultimately no longer attending the regularly scheduled monthly meetings after February 2023. But the tribe did continue to provide tribal monitors for ongoing geotechnical activities. Next slide. Ultimately, in November 2023, the authority board certified the final EIR and found that the requirements of AB 52 for the Sites Reservoir Project EIR were satisfied. In its certification of the EIR, the authority board recognized that this certification brought closure to the AB 52 consultation efforts on the overall project. However, in its CEQA findings, the authority board stated its commitment to continue to work with tribes with traditional or cultural affiliation within the project area throughout the life to better understand and respectfully incorporate tribes from their perspective. This concludes my summary presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Forsyth. Ms. Reese? Will you please state your name for the record?
Fix my camera real quick. Sorry about that. Danielle Rissy.
Is Exhibit Sites 91 an accurate statement of your written testimony?
Yes.
Did you prepare that written testimony?
Yes, I did.
Is Exhibit Sites 271 an accurate summary presentation of your written testimony?
Yes, it is.
And did you prepare that written summary?
I did.
Do you have any corrections you would like to make to your testimony or your summary of testimony?
I do. To page 5, line 19 of my written testimony. The mitigation measure reference should be mitigation measure TCR 1.3 and not mitigation measure CUL 3.2. And similarly, a correction is needed to page 10, line 19 of my written testimony, where the mitigation measure reference should be mitigation measure TCR 1.3, not mitigation measure CUL 3.2. And finally, in my summary presentation, sites 271, slide 8, the first bullet references mitigation measure CUL 3.2, but should reference mitigation measure TCR 1.3 instead.
Great, thank you. Is exhibit sites 105 a true and correct copy of your statement of qualifications?
Yes, it is.
And do exhibit sites 74, 75, 76, 95, 96, 98, 100, 106, and 107, which you submitted with your written testimony and cited therein, contain true and correct copies of documentation you relied on to form your opinions concerning the authority's efforts and plans to identify, avoid, protect, and treat tribal cultural resources, tribal lands, and tribal interests?
Yes.
Would you please summarize your written testimony using exhibit sites 271?
Yes.
Thank you.
Please go ahead and go to the next slide. Great, thanks. I'm a senior cultural resources specialist and senior archaeologist for HDR Engineering. I have 24 years of experience in the field of archaeology and cultural resources management. I currently serve on the site's Project Authorities Integration Team, assisting the authority with oversight of consultants leading the cultural resources compliance and management tasks. These tasks include analysis of the project's potential to impact cultural resources, preparation of cultural resources technical reports, and preparation of the cultural resources and tribal cultural resources chapters of the revised draft EIR, supplemental draft EIS, and final EIR, EIS. Next slide, please. This portion of my presentation will discuss tribal cultural resources and the authority's efforts to analyze tribal cultural resources as part of their CEQA compliance process. In 2014, CEQA was amended by Assembly Bill 52, which created a new category of CEQA considered resources, tribal cultural resources. AB 52 established that a substantial adverse change to a tribal cultural resource has a significant effect on the environment. Next slide, please. Tribal cultural resources are sites, features, places, cultural landscapes, sacred places, and objects with cultural value to a California Native American tribe that are included or eligible for inclusion in the California Register of Historical Resources, or are included in a local register of historical resources. Tribal cultural resources are also resources determined by the lead agency at its discretion and supported by substantial evidence to be significant pursuant to criteria set forth in the Public Resources Code, while considering significance of the resource to a California Native American tribe. As described, tribal cultural resources are tangible resources that must have cultural value to a California Native American tribe. Thus, while publicly available published literature and anthropological reports can provide context and supplemental information regarding a tribal cultural resource, the cultural value to a Native American tribe can only be identified through discussions with the tribe and tribal community members. Next slide, please. The authority's analysis for identifying and assessing potential project impacts to tribal cultural resources included conducting background research, identifying California Native American tribes that are traditionally and culturally affiliated with the geographic area of the project, consulting with such tribes if requested by individual tribes pursuant to AB 52 consultation, and identifying project impacts that would cause a substantial adverse change in the significance of a tribal cultural resource. Next slide, please. Through AB 52 consultation, the consulting tribes communicated to the authority that tribal cultural resources are present within the project area and would be affected by the project in ways that would cause substantial adverse changes in the significance of these tribal cultural resources. The consulting tribes communicated that such resources cannot be replaced and that many will be wholly or partially destroyed by the project or otherwise impaired by project implementation. However, beyond these generalized assessments, the consulting tribes provided the authority with little detail regarding the specific nature, location, and potential project impacts to tribal cultural resources. As described in Chapter 23 of the final EIR-EIS, the authority determined that the project will have significant and unavoidable impacts on tribal cultural resources, even after mitigation. Impacts include the filling of the site's reservoir, which would destroy or eliminate access to any resources potentially present in the inundation area, such as, but not limited to, gathering of plant resources, and inundate Native American ancestral sites, construction and operations that could disturb known or currently unknown burial sites, construction that could disturb or destroy both surface and buried tribal cultural resources, an alteration of the landscape which could disrupt cultural and spiritual practices. Next slide, please. The final EIR-EIS includes these mitigation measures to address impacts to tribal cultural resources. Mitigation measures CUL 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and 2.4 are specific to archaeological resources, which can also be tribal cultural resources. Under these mitigation measures, the authority will implement efforts to identify eligible archaeological resources that have the potential to be affected by the project. These mitigation measures also include avoiding impacts as possible to eligible archaeological resources through resource-specific avoidance protocols, conducting monitoring, and conducting workers' cultural resources sensitivity training, which tribes will be invited to attend and help lead. These mitigation measures also include assessing resource-specific impacts to those eligible archaeological resources that cannot be avoided by the project. Finally, these mitigation measures require the authority to develop and implement resource-specific treatment plans in consultation with tribes, agencies, and other interested parties for eligible archaeological resources that will be affected by the project. Treatment will be in line with best practices and professional standards and be sensitive to traditional and cultural values of the consulting parties. Under mitigation measure CUL 3.1 and 3.2, the authority will develop and implement a cemetery relocation plan for relocating 2 known dedicated cemeteries that cannot be avoided by the project. Both cemeteries are located within the reservoir inundation area. The cemetery relocation efforts will be conducted in accordance with the wishes of descendants and the state and county health and safety codes. These mitigation measures also require the authority to prepare a burial treatment plan for treating human remains and/or grave goods encountered during archaeological investigations, project construction, or project operations. The plan will outline the processes for addressing unanticipated discoveries of human remains and/or grave goods when they are discovered on private, non-federal, public, or federally managed lands according to state and federal law. The burial treatment plan will be developed in consultation with consulting tribes and may include individual tribes' burial treatment plans. Mitigation measures TCR 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3 utilize the example mitigation measures for avoiding and minimizing significant adverse impacts to tribal cultural resources provided by Public Resources Code Section 21084.3. Under mitigation measure TCR 1.2, tribal monitors will be permitted to observe all ground disturbing activities. These mitigation measures also outline processes the authority will follow for the treatment of human remains and cultural items in compliance with all federal and state laws, including how the authority will waive any and all claims to ownership of tribal cultural items, including ceremonial items and archaeological items that may be found. These preferred treatment protocols follow the treatment protocol for handling human remains and cultural items affiliated with the Yochadihi Wintun Nation, which was provided by Yochadihi Wintun Nation to the authority. Next slide, please. Other than recommending that the project should not be built, the consulting tribes did not recommend or comment on specific mitigation measures to address impacts to tribal cultural resources, other than the information provided by Yochadihi Wintun Nation on the preferred treatment of human remains, which is incorporated under mitigation measure TCR 1.3. As such, the authority incorporated example measures from the Public Resources Code into its mitigation package. Mitigation measure TCR 1.1 utilizes these example mitigation measures for avoiding and minimizing significant adverse impacts to tribal cultural resources. These measures involve 1, avoidance and preservation in place of tribal cultural resources, 2, treating a tribal cultural resource with culturally appropriate dignity, taking into account tribal cultural values and the meaning of the resource, and 3, creating permanent conservation easements or other interests in real property that are protective of a tribal cultural resource. The mitigation measures included in the final EIS will avoid and/or minimize damaging effects to tribal cultural resources when feasible, meet the intent of AB 52 to recognize California Native American tribal sovereignty, allow for ongoing and continued collaboration with the consulting tribes regarding tribal cultural resources, and that allow the calibration of protocols and protections to particular tribal cultural resources. Next slide, please. The remainder of my presentation considers project impacts to tribal lands and tribal interests and considers racial equity and environmental justice with respect to California Native American tribes. Next slide, please. There are no tribal trust lands or lands held in fee by Native American tribes within the project footprint. Tribal trust lands are one kind of Indian trust asset, or ITA. An ITA is defined as a legal interest in property held in trust by the United States for Indian tribes or individuals. Project impacts to ITAs were addressed in Chapter 29 of the final EIS, the development of which was led by Reclamation. There are no ITAs within or adjacent to potential areas of project construction disturbance. Thus, project construction was found to have no effect to ITAs. Further analysis in Chapter 29, drawing from chapters covering surface water resources, fluvial geomorphology, aquatic biological resources, project operations, and river operations, found that project operations will not adversely affect ITAs. The project would not affect any operations of the Trinity River Diversion or the Lower Klamath River that serve ITAs. The project could have a beneficial effect on the ITAs that receive water from municipalities that use State Water Project and Central Valley Project water by increasing these water deliveries and making these water deliveries more reliable. River flows in the Sacramento, Feather, and American rivers would change, but these changes are within historical ranges and thus would not have substantial adverse effects on fish. Modeled changes in flood flows during operations are minor, and adverse changes are not expected in erosion or quality of land or sites of religious or cultural importance to a tribe. Required permit stipulations and best management practices will be used during project maintenance activities to avoid and minimize sediment and contaminant releases into water courses. This would protect resources that could occur in ITAs and minimize effects on aquatic species important to tribes. Next slide, please. The project will significantly impact the lands where the proposed facilities will be built. including within the footprint of the reservoir. The landscape will not look the same, feel the same, and cannot be experienced in the same way by Native American communities who have lived with and in the landscape where the project is located since time immemorial. The final EIR-EIS acknowledges these significant impacts that will occur as a result of project implementation and identifies feasible mitigation measures consistent with CEQA requirements to avoid or lessen significant impacts, and also acknowledges that impacts would not be fully mitigated as described above for tribal cultural resources. These mitigation measures will require the authority to continue its collaboration with California Native American tribes, regulating agencies, and other interested parties throughout project implementation to monitor and consider impacts to the land and resources described above. Next slide, please. While tribes are sovereign nations, they can be impacted by federal, state, and local government decisions and policies where they have exercised their interests since time immemorial. As described in comments received from tribes and tribally associated entities on the revised draft EIR, supplemental draft EIS, these interests include ceremonial and sacred sites, burials, and village sites, traditional resources, tribal people and communities, meaningful tribal outreach and consultation, including government-to-government consultation, salmon, fisheries, other aquatic resources, culturally important plants, water quality and water flows, tribal beneficial uses, and tribal rights and tribal trust resources. Next slide, please. Assessments of project impacts to ceremonial and sacred sites, burials, and village sites were considered in chapters 22 and 23 of the final EIR-EIS, which addresses archaeological resources and tribal culture resources. Chapter 22 of the final EIR-EIS found that project impacts on archaeological resources would be significant and unavoidable. Chapter 23 of the final EIR-EIS found that project impacts on tribal cultural resources would also be significant and unavoidable. Mitigation measures were identified and included in the final EIR-EIS, including a commitment to avoid and protect these resources where possible through feasible project design specifications, project construction protocols, and project operations protocols. Traditional resources include water resources of the Sacramento River watershed, including the Delta. They also include a broader suite of resources in the Delta that tribes have utilized for food, medicine, transportation, shelter, clothing, ceremony, and traditional lifeways from the beginning of time. Modeling showed that acres of floodplain and inundated wetlands in the North Delta, such as the Yolo bypass, will not be substantially reduced by the project. Effects from project operations would not have substantial adverse effects on fish, other aquatic species important to Indian tribes, or the quality of land or sites of villages or cultural importance to an Indian tribe. The health, life expectancy, and future of tribal people and communities comprise tribal interests. The health and future of tribal people is tied to the health of the environment and the continuation of tribal culture and protection of tribal heritage. Through the CEQA process, the authority has considered the environmental consequences of the project, and where significant environmental impacts have been identified, the authority has developed feasible mitigation measures that will be implemented to avoid and/or reduce impacts. As the authority acknowledges, there are significant environmental impacts from the project that cannot be mitigated to a less than significant level. As already described, impacts to tribal cultural resources will be significant and unavoidable, even after mitigation. However, the authority will continue to coordinate and collaborate with California Native American tribes for the life of the project. Next slide, please. Meaningful tribal outreach and consultation, including government-to-government consultation, is a tribal interest. As already described, the authority engaged in AB 52 related consultation and ongoing collaboration and coordination with Native American tribes is and will continue to occur and is required by the mitigation measures included in the final EIR-EIS. Reclamation is still conducting government-to-government consultation for the project with potentially affected tribes pursuant to Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. Reclamation anticipates concluding the Section 106 process through a programmatic agreement that also will lay out a process for consulting with tribes. Potential project impacts to salmon, fisheries, and other aquatic resources, habitats related to culturally important plants, water quality, and water flows are discussed in the testimonies related to water quality, fish and wildlife, project modeling, surface and groundwater, and water availability. Tribal beneficial uses are also a tribal interest. As described in the response to comments on the revised draft EIR, supplemental draft EIS, the authority will consider project effects, if any, to tribal beneficial uses when TBUs are established relevant water body segments that would be affected by the project. Tribal rights and tribal trust resources are tribal interests. As previously described, the project construction was found to have no effect to Indian trust assets, and project operations will not adversely affect Indian trust assets. Next slide, please. And go ahead to the next one. Thank you. Chapter 23 of the final EIR-AIS acknowledges the violent relationship of the state with California Native Americans and describes how this violent history has shaped the way tribes have been marginalized and repressed, how current views by non-Native Americans are biased towards ignoring this relationship, and the ongoing marginalization and repression of California Native Americans today. As previously described, the authority conducted AB 52 consultation and considered project impacts to tribal cultural resources as required by the AB 52 CEQA amendments. The intent of AB 52 is to recognize California Native American tribal sovereignty and the unique relationship of California local governments and public agencies with California Native American tribal governments. To further the authority's commitment to continuing collaboration and coordination with Native American tribes, the authority proposes the preparation of a memorandum of agreement that would formalize a collaborative partnership between the authority and the tribes that are traditionally and culturally affiliated with the project area, and commitment to develop with the tribes methods to avoid, minimize, and mitigate impacts on and manage tribal cultural resources in a culturally appropriate way throughout the life of the project. The authority's ongoing commitment to meaningful consultation with tribes, as well as to additional initiatives such as its proposed MOA, endeavors to advance racial equity and environmental justice. That concludes my testimony summary. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rizzi.
All right, direct examination of panel 9 is complete. So we're ready for cross-examination.
Thank you. And with that, I will turn to the coordinating NGO parties. Which of you, I'll look to the room generally. To whom should I turn for initial questions for this panel? Ms. Willie?
I believe it's me. Yeah.
Great. Then we'll start with you, please.
Okay. So I'm just a quick introduction. I'm Kso Willie. I am a Pomo, Paiute, Wintu, and Waialeki tribal person enrolled with the Walker River Paiute tribe. And I am the staff attorney for Save California Salmon, currently working out of Sacramento on Nisenan and Miwok lands. And so to start, I'll start with Ms. Forsyth. Could you explain the correction to your testimony one more time? I'm not sure. I wasn't entirely clear on the change that you made. Were you changing it so that the authority did not contact 13 tribes?
Can we maybe, Ms. Forsyth, if you'll bring it, we'll bring up the page if you can give us
Yeah.
a citation.
Page 22 of site 71.
Okay, site 71, page 22.
Yes, so if we scroll down, sorry, I'm just getting my bearings here. Okay, so in this, on that, on line 15 and 16, it states the authority contacted the following 13 tribes, parentheses, 6 of which had been previously contacted by the authority as part of the authority's prior AB 52 consul efforts described below in parentheses. I was correcting that to reflect that the authority contacted 7 tribes as part of this 2021 additional outreach effort. So there are 13 tribes that we identified associated with the segments of the rivers I mentioned previously in the paragraph below the rim dams. 6 of those tribes have been previously contacted by the authority as part of our AB 52 consultation efforts. In this outreach effort, I was correcting the record that we contacted the 7 additional tribes that had not been previously contacted by the authority.
Okay, thank you. And so would you be able to list out the 7 tribes contacted first, or 6 and then 7, or 7 and 6? Those 2 separate lists of tribes.
Yeah, let me get there. If you could scroll down just a little bit, Miss Mullen, on that. So we had, right there is perfect. We had previously contacted Gachaldehi, Quetzaldehi, Paskenta, and Yochidehi. Sorry, and also Danielle, it was the
Sure. Also, Enterprise Rancheria was part of our initial consultation, and Mechoopda Indian Tribe was part of the initial consultation.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So that's 6 tribes?
Yes.
An additional one?
That was the 6 tribes we had originally contacted as part of our AB 52 consultation that are listed within this paragraph. We contacted the 7 additional that we had not previously contacted.
And at another point in your testimony, Grindstone Rancheria was listed. Was that a tribe contacted originally or in the additional outreach?
That was a tribe contacted originally.
Okay. So altogether, there's 14 tribes, is that correct?
Yes, 7 from originally contacted as part of the outreach and the response from the Native American Heritage Commission that we contacted both twice for the project and then a few times for geotechnical activities. And then here we contacted an additional 7 tribes, so 14 total.
Okay, and just so I'm clear, in the other parts of your testimony where you reference 13 tribes, do you mean 14 now?
I believe this is, I would have to double check. I believe this is the only space where I'm referencing 13 tribes, because it was the 13 tribes associated with with the river segments.
The 14 tribes.
Well, let me be clear. There's 13 tribes associated with, this is speaking about outreach. 2 tribes that have traditional or cultural affiliation with the Sacramento River below Keswick, Feather River below Folsom, or excuse me, below Oroville, American River below Folsom. So the 13 tribes is referring to those tribes that have traditional or cultural affiliation with those river segments. In total, between the project footprint and those tribes that have traditional or cultural affiliation with the river segments, we have contacted a total of 14 tribes.
Yep, thank you. Okay, I think that's clear for me right now. And so going to your background, have you ever had to take a cultural sensitivity training?
I don't believe, well, I may have in working in the federal government. And I had also taken, I want to say, an Indian water right law training while working in the federal government.
Okay, so you have been trained on how to engage with tribal governments and or individuals. Is that correct?
I think it's a little tricky to say I have been trained. There's very few specific trainings that I am aware of on how to engage. I will say, as part of my role in the Bureau of Reclamation, I was responsible on behalf of the federal government for reaching out and engaging on a government-to-government consultation basis with Indian tribes. And that role has continued here with the authority. So I have had experience both in the Bureau of Reclamation and with the authority. The federal government has some training, but I will say that I have searched and I find it, limited to. There's a lot of training on archaeological and those kind of components, but for the layperson to have training on how to coordinate and communicate with Indian tribes is a little bit more limited.
Okay, so you would say your knowledge is mostly experience-based rather than formal training in this field?
Fair, yeah.
And so could you briefly describe, just as like a quick overview, what the purpose of CEQA's AB 52 is generally?
AB 52 has a number of components to it. I think generally it is intended for tribal cultural resources to be recognized as resources within an EIR or within a CEQA process. That can also be a negative declaration or mitigated negative declaration. And for the lead agency to identify and determine impacts on those resources. AB 52 is also intended for meaningful consultation between a lead agency and a California Native American tribe on those tribal cultural resources. So ensuring tribal input into the CEQA process.
Thank you. And could you define consultation?
I believe consultation is defined in AB 52, and you can give me. I would need to look up the code section, but AB 52 itself.
I have it here, Allie, if you want me to.
That would be fantastic. I was just.
Yep. AB 52 references, or the AB 52 editions reference that consultation shall have the same meaning as provided in section 65352.4 of the government code, which provides that consultation means the meaningful and timely process of seeking, discussing, and considering carefully the views of others in a manner that is cognizant of all parties' cultural values and, where feasible, seeking agreement. Consultation between government agencies and Native American tribes shall be conducted in a way that is mutually respectful of each party's sovereignty. Consultation shall also recognize the tribe's potential needs for confidentiality with respect to places that have traditional tribal cultural significance.
And so you would agree that that's your understanding of the definition of consultation?
Yes, it's a definition in AB 52.
And that's the one you are abiding by for this process?
Yes.
So what are the requirements for consultation, or what are the elements of adequate consultation?
I think the elements of adequate consultation, I believe, have been somewhat opined upon by the state in its AB 52 guidance. And I'm looking for that reference here. You give me just a second. Oh shoot, I don't have it right offhand. But the state did release AB 52 guidance that talks about the elements of consultation. Under AB 52, there are certain timeframes that are intended to be met. The lead agency is intended to reach out to California Native American tribes very early in the process, to work to have consultation as early as possible, and avoid surprises later on through the process. Tribes are to respond within 30 days to that outreach, to actually initiate formal consultation under AB 52. And the state's guidance from OPR, Office of Planning and Research, identifies that consultation, and I'm paraphrasing here because I can't find it offhand, is a communication back and forth between both the lead agency and the tribes, where both are actively participating in the consultation effort and in that communication effort, I think, is the overall summary of how I look at consultation.
Okay, thank you. And what sort of resources are included in cultural resources? Or what would you classify? What sort of resources would you classify as cultural resources?
Danielle, I think this might be a question.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Yeah.
Cultural resources is one of those words that can be hard to find a definition of. So really, to me, cultural resources are anything, made, used, or valued by people. So a story, a song, a book, all of those things are cultural resources. Natural resources that are valued by people and places that are valued by people are also cultural resources. Yep, I think that's my definition. There's a broad definition.
Thank you. Okay, now I'd like to move over to your testimony. I don't know if it's helpful to bring that up, site 71. But you describe your prior work with the Bureau of Reclamation and then a few other organizations. For the Bureau of Reclamation, did you conduct tribal consultations in that position?
Yes, I did.
And with the other organizations, did you also contact or conduct tribal consultation?
No, only with the Bureau of Reclamation.
And how long ago did you work for the Bureau of Reclamation?
I worked for the Bureau of Reclamation from 2009 to 2019.
Okay, so on page 18, paragraph 69, lines 25 to 27, you mentioned, quote, other tribal outreach. What type of actions are included in other types of outreach?
Yeah, we were in this working to distinguish between formal consultation under AB 52, where there are timelines that the authority and the tribes both need to meet to be in AB 52 consultation. Other outreach activities are activities that the authority has conducted outside of what I'd call formal AB 52 consultation. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
And what types of communications would that entail? Phone calls, emails, letters?
Sure. Well, there's, for example, the Pascanta tribe did not respond, and we were within the time frame on AB to consult formally under AB 52. However, when the Pascanta expressed interest in the project, we have started monthly calls with them and have coordinated with them, been having discussions with them. So I would consider that to be other outreach while we're not formally in AB 52 consultation. We have absolutely sought to engage with the tribe as they have expressed interest more recently in the project. I think the other components to this is our tribal working group, tribal government working group, where we're looking to invite 5 tribes to have a standing working group with the authority. 2 of those tribes we were in AB 52 consultation with. 3 we were not, but we were really and continue to look for ways to engage with all 5 tribes, but also with those 3 that have not responded to the authority, 2 of which have not responded to the authority in the past, to try and find ways to engage them in the project currently and into the future. So what I'm distinguishing there is their formal AB 52 consultation and then efforts by the authority to continue to engage with tribes outside of and following on to the AB 52 efforts.
Okay, thank you. And then since you brought up the tribal working group, why was it that only 5 tribes were invited to that?
Those were the 5 tribes that have traditional or cultural affiliation with the project footprint. We are continuing to look at ways to engage with those 5 tribes because they are most like acutely and physically affected by the project.
And I'm sorry, I'm going to go back to the beginning. what's the difference between the 7 tribes and these 5 tribes?
Yeah, so the 7 tribes, let me find the 7. And Danielle, if you have it, the 7 tribes also include
Pachuca and Enterprise Rancheria are the 2 additional in addition to the 5.
Yep. So the 7 includes Pachuca and Enterprise Rancheria. Those 2 tribes generally are while they were identified by the California Native Heritage Commission, they generally are on the other side of the Sacramento River, and not entirely associated with the project footprint. So we had been we've always reached out to the 7 in our formal AB 52 consultation, but have really focused things like the tribal working group on the 5 that have traditional or cultural affiliation with the project footprint.
And so why was that decision made to only focus on the project footprint when the Native American Heritage Commission identified 7 tribes that will be impacted?
Objection, misstates testimony. She never said all tribes would be impacted.
Well, okay. Ms. Willie, I think you can try that question again. We can get to that. I think I understand your question. But try a rephrase, please.
Okay. Basically, why was the tribal working group why was the decision made to limit it to these 5 tribes rather than the 7?
We limited it to these 5 tribes because we felt that they were, as we understood from just our understanding and in talking to the tribes, that these were the 5 that had traditional and cultural affiliation with the project footprint. We anticipated that there could be times when the tribal government working group could get into sensitive topics about pre and post contact use of areas and resources, tribal cultural resources within the project footprint, and that there may have been a need to keep those discussions limited to those tribes with traditional and cultural affiliation with a footprint. So fundamentally, we felt that there could be conversations that could be sensitive, that those tribes would want to keep among themselves. I think we always are and do remain open to including more tribes, but would want to be careful and sensitive to the requests of the 5 so that we don't overstep their comfort zone in dialogue.
So with that reasoning, though, isn't it possible that the 5 tribes included would want to have then separate conversations so that each of their individual resources would be confidential?
Absolutely. And we have always envisioned the tribal working group to be a forum for dialogue, for conversation, but highly unlikely a forum that would replace individual one-on-one conversations because of the confidential nature of those. So it's tricky. It's very tricky. We wanted to create the tribal government working group to create a forum for dialogue and engagement, to try and engage tribes that had not been previously involved in the project, such as Quetzal, Dehi, and Grindstone, but recognize that some of the discussion would likely still need to happen one-on-one between the authority and a specific tribe because of the confidentiality of the dialogue. there's no perfect, I think, way to structure this. And so we were trying our best to create multiple forums.
But with that reasoning, then wouldn't it have been possible to include Mechoopda and Enterprise if you were then also going to be having these confidential one-on-one meetings anyways?
It would be possible. My preference would be to have a working group meeting and ask those tribes if they were comfortable, rather than assume.
Thank you.
If
Officer
you can, I'm
Kinsey.
sorry to interrupt, Ms. Willie. I'm going to just pause for a moment. Ms. Ingram, I wanted to address, I see you have a hand. And you're welcome to respond, but normally the way this would work is that this is Ms. Willie's opportunity to ask questions, and then the other parties will have an opportunity in turn to ask questions, but I wanted to, maybe it was an errant hand. All right.
Yes, thank you. I'll put it down. I'll raise it later. Excuse me.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Willie, back to you.
I was just going to offer, if it's relevant, if she would like to ask a question here, I'm okay with that. She is a tribal representative.
Yeah, it is relevant.
Please, then go ahead.
I would actually prefer to allow Castle to ask the question, but because I'm just a tribal member, but I know that we weren't contacted, or I'm pretty sure nobody tried to contact us, but I'll ask that question with the Che'efoka or Northeastern Pomo Band in Stony Ford, which is on Stony Creek.
Is the question whether
That's
they were
the question.
contacted?
I'm wondering did anyone try to contact us, because we have one phone number, one web address, one email. So I don't think we were contacted.
So Ms. Ingram, just for clarity on the record, will you state the tribal name again?
The tribal name is, I'll put it in the English version, which is Northeastern Pomo. And for Ms. Castle probably recognizes us. The rest of you might not, but the other tribes recognize us.
So Ms. Forsyth or Ms. Rizzi, are you aware of an attempt to contact what we're referring to as the Northeastern Pomo?
We did not reach out to the Northeastern Pomo. It was not a tribe that we received from the Native American Heritage Commission as having traditional or cultural affiliation with the project footprint. We did have information on the Northeastern Pomo in our confidential cultural resources report, but we didn't have any information that indicated that there was a cultural or traditional affiliation with the Sites Valley. I will say that once we received some information from Mr. King and looked that up, I did look up their website, and it does appear that there's some connection with the Sites Valley. But it was not a tribe that we reached out to. We just didn't have the information to indicate that there was a traditional cultural affiliation.
So now that you have that information, would you be reaching out to us?
I think we'd be happy to, yes.
Thank you. Do you have any follow-up, Ms. Ingram, before I turn back to Ms. Willie?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Willie, back to you.
Well, excuse me, Ms. Kinsey. Can
Yes.
Ms. Ingram identify herself? I didn't get a full understanding of who she is.
Please.
Hi.
If you can just state your name and I'm sorry, state your name and your affiliation here.
My name is Deborah Ingram. My affiliation is with Northeastern Pomo of Stony Ford, also known as Che'efoka. I'm a board member.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Ms. Willie.
Thank you. I appreciate the ability and flexibility for allowing Ms. Ingram to ask her question. Okay, so returning to your testimony, page 20, paragraph 72. So you were hired on by sites in 2019, is that correct?
That's correct.
So do you acknowledge that some of these events listed here in the initial consultation outreach paragraph occurred before you were brought on?
That is correct.
So do you have personal knowledge of what occurred prior to 2019?
I have knowledge that I've reviewed all of the records of the authority as reflected in sites 095 of the authority's efforts relative to AB 52 consultation.
And so will you be able to answer questions related to these events that happened before 2019?
To the best of my knowledge and understanding, yes.
And so I have a question related to the Native American Heritage Commission list. Are you familiar that there are shortcomings with this list and tribes are not always satisfied?
I am familiar, yes. I will say while we contacted the commission to receive a list, we did carefully look at the list along with consulting with individuals that are on the project team to ask and review the list carefully for its validity. Unfortunately, we did miss the Che'e FOMO on this FOCA, the Che'e FOCA. But we did review the list carefully, recognizing that there are shortcomings.
Thank you. And then on line 11, you state that the authority sent project notification letters. What was the method of sending these letters? Was it by mail or by email?
I believe all of these would have been originally sent by mail for some contacts, and I would just have to check through the record in sites 095. We did follow up either with email or a phone call. I just have to look through the record to verify that, but the original letters would have gone by mail, and I believe by certified mail.
And so for certified mail, does the letter then have to be sent to the intended recipient, or can anyone accept the certified mail?
I believe anybody can sign for certified mail.
So potentially the right person could not have accepted the notification letter, is that correct?
Objection calls for speculation.
Well, we'll ask it this way. For certified mail, Ms. Forsyth, is it your understanding that a person other than to whom the mail was addressed could sign for a certified letter?
That is my understanding.
Go ahead, Ms. Willie.
And then on paragraph 73, you note that a second letter was sent to Yochadihe to confirm they did not wish to be consulted. Why was it that Yochadihe was the only tribe to receive this subsequent letter?
This I'm going to need to speak about just in context of the record that I have reviewed, since I was not personally involved in this. And in discussions with some of the team members that I've had since that time frame as to why it was just Yochadihe, It is my understanding from discussions from some of the team members that the team felt Yochadihi wanted to consult and had been involved in other projects from some of our authority board and reservoir committee members, and that it was highly likely that they would want to consult. And so this follow-up was specific to Yochadihi because the team at that time felt that there was interest, but they had not responded.
So upon that second contact, Yochadihi did confirm or did request consultation. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
But there were no other efforts made to see if perhaps another tribe maybe wanted to be consulted and just needed an email or letter.
Sorry, I didn't mean to speak over you. Not at that time. I will say though, in our 2021 outreach, when we reached out again to those 7 tribes, when we decided to recirculate the revised draft EIR, we did contact the 7 tribes again, identified by the Native American Heritage Commission.
And that was the recirculation of the EIR, is that correct?
Yes, yes, that is correct.
And now if you could go to paragraph 75, please. I'm sorry, on the next page, page 21. So for the geotechnical investigations in 2019 to 2020, in 2019, he provided notice to Yochadihi, Cachildihe, and Quetzaldihe, but Quetzaldihe did not respond. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you said no other notification, second notification was given in this instance.
I would need to review. Can you let me know what you mean by second communication, meaning like email or phone call or?
Just anything. Was there a second attempt to contact them about the geotechnical investigation since it was just these 3 tribes?
Let me double check the record here. Sorry, let me double check the record here. I am not seeing any follow-up email or phone call record before in this item for Cortina for the Quetzaldihe.
And will there be?
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. Did you have more?
It's.
Okay. Will there be further geotechnical work needed for this project?
Well, there was 2 more consultation efforts for geotech that I mentioned further down in my testimony. So beyond the 2 additional ones mentioned down in paragraph 83 and paragraph 90, we do not have any other geotech work as separate projects planned at this time. There will be geotech work that will be necessary, that will be covered and is covered from a CEQA perspective under the EIR, under the overall project EIR.
And will tribal outreach be conducted for that portion?
We have already completed AB 52 consultation for the overall sites project EIR, so there will not be AB 52 separate AB 52 consultation for activities conducted under the EIR. However, as Ms. Reese identified and testified to, all of those activities, even geotech activities, will need to comply with the mitigation measures in the EIR. So there will be consultation and discussions as we implement those mitigation measures. There will not be formal AB 52 consultation.
Will there be the opportunity for the sort of informal consultation that you mentioned earlier outside of the AB 52?
We always welcome that, yes.
And then if you could scroll down to page or paragraph 76, sorry. Line 16 states the authority held meetings with Yocha Dihe. And that there was a compilation of calls and meetings that occurred with Yocha Dihe and Kachel Dihe. You mentioned that information was shared at these sessions, but did the tribes have the opportunity to provide their own input and opinions to be worked on in this project?
We were, I feel like, yes, that was what we were trying to solicit, was feedback. At this time, we were revising the project. We had removed the Delavan pipeline, which was a component of the project in 2017, with which the Kachel Dihe had substantial concerns over. And so at this time, we were refining the project through the value planning effort. We were making adjustments to try and reduce our environmental impacts and frankly, control costs of the project. And these meetings were held with the intent to try and solicit feedback on those project refinements, along with any information on mitigation measures. Although at this time we weren't really, it's a little bit later in the process that we were developing mitigation measures. We were really refining the project here.
And was there an explicit ask or request for input from the tribes, or was that just expected after your presentations?
During this time frame, I was involved in these meetings, and we did have, to my recollection, we did have explicit requests for input on those project refinements.
Okay, now if you could go to page 22, paragraph 79, an additional outreach. Actually, I'm not sure if my documents that I submitted are available, but SES Cross 1, if you could bring that up.
I believe we're working on it.
And if you could zoom in on the first paragraph. Okay, are you familiar or do you know of the Winnemem Wintu tribe?
I am, yes.
So this is their tribal website, and I don't know if you have the opportunity to read this first paragraph, but it describes the traditional homelands of the Winnemem-Wintu people as being situated between the upper Sacramento River and the Pitt River. And so, do you have a general idea of where the Winnemem-Wintu tribe's homelands are?
I can't see that I've like seen a map that showed them, but I have read this description in Mr. Mulcahy's testimony.
And so, do you understand, or are you aware that as Wintu people, the Winnemem-Wintu tribe shares similar homelands to the Wintu tribe of Northern California, and Redding Rancheria?
I can't speak to that specifically. I will say that in this outreach effort that we conducted to tribes along the river systems, we did talk extensively about whether or not the Winnemem-Wintu should be included in that. And I think the general consensus of the group was that the tribe generally was within and had traditional lands within and above Shasta Reservoir, and not below, or extensively below. And so we chose to include just the Redding Rancheria and the Wintu tribe of Northern California. But I'm very comfortable saying that as a group, we talked about that extensively and felt that we were looking at Keswick and down along the Sacramento River.
So your conclusion was that the Winnemem-Wintu tribe is not traditionally or culturally affiliated with the locations where the project has potential to change river flows. Is that correct?
That's what we felt in that determination, yes.
When you say in that determination, have you considered it after that determination?
Continue to think about this topic as the Winnemem-Wintu tribe continues to express an interest in the project. I don't think we've made at least I know I personally continue to think about this topic. We've talked about it as a team since then. I don't think we've changed kind of that thinking, but it is something that as we continue to see interest, we continue to think about.
Thank you. And now if we could go to sites 95 on page 6. If you could scroll down to the text at the bottom. Just that last paragraph, thank you. So here it states that the Concow Valley Band of Maidu email was bounced back with no phone number, and there was no phone number available. Is that correct?
That's what this states.
And was there an effort to contact the Native American Heritage Commission to inform them of that correct email? Or that incorrect email?
I don't recall offhand.
Did you reach out to the Native American Heritage Commission in order to get a correct email potentially?
I don't recall offhand on this.
Are you aware of other attempts that were made to potentially find an appropriate contact?
We have a team, both individuals within HDR, but also individuals at ICF and subcontractors that help us approach our tribal cultural resources and work with California Native American tribes. I would think that the team, if they had a correct email or telephone number, would have shared that. So we did not. I'm not aware of a reach back to the Native American Heritage Commission. We have a number of folks that work on these topics that work with tribes on other projects. And I'm sure our team members coordinated together to see if we had anything and likely didn't come up with anything.
So you don't know if the email that was incorrect is the same one that's available on their Facebook page?
I don't.
Okay, and then if we could turn back to Ms. Forsythe's testimony, paragraph 81.
Ms. Willie, can we get a quick time check? I'm looking, we're at 12:06 and you may, I just wanted to check in and see when a good time for our lunch break would be.
I can stop anytime if now is okay, good time. We can
And do you have a guesstimate as to how long your additional questions may take?
In total?
Yes.
At least another hour, probably.
Okay. If this is a good time for a break, I think I would like to go ahead and break for lunch, because we've been going for a little while. My plan would be to reconvene at 1 o'clock, but before we break, are there any procedural issues we should address first? Great. Then with that, thank you very much. Do please plan to log back into the Zoom platform, and I will see all of you at 1 o'clock.